Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to episode 216 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about the psychic medium, Robert Righi. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
In the last few years, a psychic medium known as Robert Righi has been giving interviews on many podcasts. It's understandable why so many podcasts would be interested in him. He has a very dramatic life story. After experiencing an apparition at age 4, he went on to display psychic powers. He gained 2 master's degrees and became licensed as a forensic psychologist and clinical social worker in multiple states. When he was still in college, he interviewed the serial killer Ted Bundy. He participated in 2 exorcisms authorized by the Archdiocese of Chicago, and today he works with psychic children and children who are in the process of dying. But it's important to check out the claims of people with dramatic life stories, and Jimmy recently played a role in an investigation of Righi. So what did the investigation reveal? What investigative techniques were used? And did Righi's claims check out? Well, that's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Jimmy, how did you first become aware of today's mystery, and why did you want to cover the topic on Mysterious World?
A few months ago, I got a message from Kenny Biddle. Kenny is an open-minded skeptic who writes for the Skeptical Inquirer, and he's also been one of my instructors at the Ryan Education Center, where he co-taught a course I took on skepticism and parapsychology. When I took the course, I was impressed with him and the investigative techniques he uses, so I was happy to play a small role in his investigation when he contacted me about a psychic medium named Robert Righi. As you said, Righi has been appearing on a lot of podcasts over the last 4 years, beginning in late 2018. When I dug into it, I was really surprised to see just how many appearances he'd made. It's a lot more than you might think. So he's been an extremely popular guest on paranormal-themed podcasts, and that's understandable since he has a dramatic story to tell. But it's always important to test the claims that people are making, as we point out here on Mysterious World, and Kenny Biddle did exactly that. Eventually, Kenny published an article on his findings, and I wanted to talk about this case today because it's an excellent illustration of what you can find out using modern investigative techniques.
Are there any things we should be aware of before we start looking at the investigation?
As always, we'll be keeping things clinical and won't be dwelling on sensationalistic details, but some things could be a bit disturbing, especially for sensitive listeners, so parents may wish to listen first and make decisions for their families.
And how will we be proceeding with today's mystery?
Well, as we usually do, we'll first give the background on the mystery before we analyze it. In this case, that means we'll start by telling Robert Righi's story as he's told it on a variety of podcasts. And then afterwards, in the segment on the reason perspective, we'll be bringing on Kenny Biddle to tell us about his investigation and what he found. The key thing to note for, going forward purposes is what techniques Kenny used and how they can and should be applied when someone is making dramatic claims about their life story.
Then let's look at Robert Righi. Who is he?
Robert Righi is a psychic medium. That means he claims to be both a psychic and a medium. There's 2 different things, although they're related. Some people only claim to be a psychic, others claim only to be a medium, but Righi claims to be both. He's 67 years old, and he lives in Peoria, Illinois. In 2021, he wrote a biography that was posted to the Paranormal 101 education page on Facebook, and it says,
"My name is Robert Righi. I have a master's degree in forensics psychology and clinical social work from the University of Florida. I am licensed to practice within the realm and criteria set by each particular state in the realm of forensic psychology and clinical social work. I am also a psychic medium. My first experience is when I was 4, and I will be 67 in November." That was in 2021, so he is 67 now. "I do many things within the field. I combine my psychic abilities and my mediumship along with the vast experience and education within the realm of forensic psychology and clinical social work. I combine those disciplines together and they work beautifully. I also mentor children, which I will call children of the paranormal. I assist the children as well as their families, understanding their abilities and gifts. I also volunteered at a hospice that ministers to children in their homes, and I am called in within hours before these beautiful, beautiful children that leave this earth of 3 dimensions for the heavenly dimension, and I assist the children in crossing over along with their guardian angels. I have been involved in 2 exorcisms that have been sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Chicago. Also, I am a practitioner of past life regression. I have used that in my private practice as well as within the realm of my mediumship and psychic abilities. Also, I assist those in the grieving process.
So Riggy says he has 2 master's degrees, one in forensic psychology and one in clinical social work. Both are from the University of Florida, and he's also licensed to practice in those 2 fields in various states. And he's a psychic medium, having had his first paranormal experience at the age of 4. Today, he works with psychic children to help them come to grips with their abilities, and he also helps children in hospice care who are in the process of dying. He also practices the technique of past life regression, and that's a subject we discussed back in episodes 93 and 94 on the Bridey Murphy reincarnation case, and he's been involved in 2 exorcisms authorized by the Archdiocese of Chicago.
Riggy says that his first paranormal experience occurred when he was 4 years old. What does he say about that?
On the podcast Bigfoot and the Bunny, he says,
going back to my first experience is when I was 4 years old. I had gotten up about 3 o'clock in the morning. And back then, in 1958, I was 4, right? I had no idea what 3 o'clock meant. When I was 4, like I said, I woke up, had to go to the bathroom, and I saw Abraham Lincoln. I was born and raised in Peoria, Illinois. And Abraham Lincoln came to me in a full apparition. And I remember him smiling and nodding at me. I wasn't scared. But later on, I realized that by seeing Abraham Lincoln nod at me, that was validation for what I would be doing later in life. Okay? Mm-hmm. And so after using the bathroom, I knocked on my parents' door. They thought that I was ill. And so they said, "What are you doing up?" And I said, "I had to go pee," being 4 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, "I saw Abraham Lincoln." And my father started to laugh, And so my father said, "What did he want?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "He was just nodding his head and smiling at me. That's all." I wasn't scared. So my mom said, "Crawl into bed with us," And so hours later, about 9 o'clock in the morning, my Spanish mother took me to my Italian grandmother, Nona. And we went to this white witch that I would call her, right?
White witch?
A white witch, yeah.
Okay.
A bruja in Italian and Spanish. And this looked like she was 10,000 years old. Oh my gosh, she looked like a hag. God forgive me. But anyhow, she was kind of scary to me, But she put her hand on top of my head. I could feel her energy go down and enter my little body. I began to quiver, began to shake. She could also feel my energy leave my body and go into her. Okay? She smiled. She said in Italian to my grandmother that I was quite gifted. I was special.
Before he was president, Abraham Lincoln had been a congressman from Illinois, and Lincoln was certainly a famous man whose image might even be known to a 4-year-old, especially a resident of Illinois like Riggy. So Riggy says that he saw him when he was 4 years old in 1958 while he was on his way to the bathroom. Lincoln appeared to him as an apparition, and he was a comforting presence who supportively nodded at Riggy but did not say anything. Riggy later interpreted this as indicating support for the paranormal things he would do later in life. Further, his Italian grandmother took him to a white witch, or a bruja in Spanish, and the white witch confirmed that Riggy was gifted and special.
What happened to Robert Righi after he had this initial paranormal experience at age 4?
He grew up and went to college at the University of Florida. There, he earned 2 master's degrees, one in forensic psychology and one in clinical social work. Based on the date that he entered, you might have expected him to graduate in 1978. However, he took 2 extra years of courses on anatomy and neurology. As he explains on the Paranormal Brew podcast.
So I went to University of Florida, but I took 2 extra years of physiology and anatomy. I wanted to know more about the body, how it acts, everything about that. I took extra courses in neurology and stuff like that.
While he was still in school in 1980, he had the opportunity to interview the serial killer Ted Bundy, who we will be discussing in a future episode. But here's how Riggy describes his meeting with the imprisoned serial killer.
In 1980, I was at the University of Florida. I was working on my master's degrees. I have 2 of them, one in forensic psychology and the other one in clinical social work. I had taken 2 years of more education there. I wanted to take pre-med courses. I wanted to learn more about physiology. But anyhow, I had gone to my supervisor and said, or my advisor, and I said, I want to write Ted Bundy because he's only 50 miles from us. And I want to write him to see if we can come and see him. And so I wrote to him, wrote to his lawyer, wrote to his superintendent, or wrote to the superintendent of the prison, the warden. And several weeks later, I received a letter from all 3 of them stating, yes, we were able to come there. And so on a Saturday, it was myself, 3 female psychologists, and so was myself and another male psychologist. And so the day arrived, and so we got there, and we sat in a room, and 20 minutes later, he comes into the room, and so we welcome each other, and he looks at me, and all I see is dark behind those eyes. There's no redeeming factor in that person, in Ted's eyes. He said, Robert, I know who you are, and I know what you do.
So Riggy wrote to Ted Bundy, his lawyer, and the warden of the prison, and got permission to interview Bundy. He went with 3 female psychologists and 1 male psychologist. And when Ted showed up, he told Riggy, I know who you are, and I know what you do. He'd, of course, know who Riggy was because he'd written to him, and I know what you do could be a reference to the fact that Riggy was doing psychology, like, I know who you are, you head shrinker, you manipulate people. Or it could be a reference to Riggy's claimed paranormal abilities.
Ted Bundy was executed in 1989. Meeting him while still in grad school would be rather dramatic. What did Riggy go on to do professionally after school?
He went on to get certifications in various states.
And I'm also licensed in 9 states as a forensic psychologist and clinical social worker.
This interview was given in October or November of 2021, so he indicates he was certified at that time in 9 states as a forensic psychologist and clinical social worker. He also worked for many years as a criminal profiler in Florida.
And so I was a criminal profiler, and as I look back after all these 30 plus years, I really don't know how I did it. Seeing the best of humanity and the worst of humanity, it does take its toll. It does greatly.
Elsewhere, he indicates that he worked as a profiler in Florida for 35 years. If he started doing that right out of grad school in 1980, that would represent the period between 1980 and 2015.
Riggy says that he's been involved with 2 exorcisms that were authorized by the Archdiocese of Chicago. Tell us about those.
We won't go into a lot of detail, as our goal isn't to scare people, but in his interviews, he discusses the 2 exorcisms, which he says were performed on a man named Kevin and a woman named Vivian. We'll discuss the Kevin exorcism since he says more about it. But basically, a few years ago, he says he got a phone call in the middle of the night from a man he didn't know. This man's name was Kevin, and he'd gotten Riggy's phone number because someone had heard Riggy on a radio show, and that's one of the things Riggy does. He commonly gives out his phone number on shows and invites people to call him if they want to talk. As they spoke on the phone, Kevin's voice changed, indicating it was a demon speaking through Kevin. At first, Riggy didn't conclude that it was a demon, as opposed to just Kevin pretending or Kevin being mentally ill. But Riggy then called the Diocese of Peoria, and he and a priest went out to interview Kevin and determine if he was actually possessed. During the interview, the demon began to display preternatural knowledge. This was what initially convinced him that Kevin was genuinely possessed.
And what really then I understood that he was possessed is when the demon came through him again and said, Robert, I'm going to tell you things that only you know. And then he begins to tell me of me being adopted. Now, how would Kevin know that? It's not on my Facebook.
Yeah. Well, they know everything.
Okay.
I mean, they know. Yeah, they know.
Oh, they do. Yeah.
They know.
So the demon knew that Riggy had been adopted, which is not something Kevin could have naturally known or easily known, since this information wasn't on Riggy's Facebook page.
Now, displays of preternatural knowledge are one indication of possession, as we discussed in episode 188 on whether demons are involved in a situation or not. But preternatural knowledge alone isn't enough, because people can have preternatural knowledge without demons being involved. Did they eventually conclude that Kevin showed enough signs that he could be diagnosed as genuinely possessed?
They did, and so they brought him to an exorcist.
Do you know who Father Michael is from Chicago, the Archdiocese of Chicago? If anyone would watch like Ghost Adventures and the Demon House and all that, Father Michael was on with Zach regarding that. Father Michael's a very good friend of mine.
Here, Riggy refers to Zach Baggins, who is the host of Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel. In 2018, he also produced a documentary called Demon House about a house in Gary, Indiana. And the documentary featured a priest named Father Michael Maginot, who Riggy says is a good friend of his. In addition to being the exorcist for Kevin, Father Michael was also the exorcist for Vivian.
After establishing that Kevin was possessed, they then got permission from the Archdiocese of Chicago to perform the exorcism. Where did that take place?
At a Jesuit monastery attached to Loyola University Medical Center in Maywood, Illinois. And Riggy describes how they prepared for the exorcism.
We all meet in the chapel at Loyola Medical Center as a chapel. And so being Catholic, we go to confession, we go to communion, we get ready, the rosary and stuff like that, okay? This exorcism lasts several days. It's not constant. It's not a constant exorcism. There are breaks in it. The priest needs to take break. Kevin physically needs to take a break. Now, I must also tell you that Kevin signed a form giving permission to the Catholic Church, and all of us were named, to perform this exorcism on him. He had to give permission. He had to want to get this done. First of all, legally, it protects himself and us. Secondly, he is ready to have this done. He is willing to help get rid of this demon. He also signs a form giving us a permission, Father Michael, to tape everything that goes on from the time he gets there and time he is released to go home. And now that tape, like I said, is used in instructing other priests, other people becoming exorcists.
Okay.
And so it was myself, Father Michael. Father Michael was the head exorcist. There was a psychiatrist there, a priest. There was also a behavioral psychologist who was a priest. I was there, and then 2 seminarians were there. Now, Kevin also signed a form stating that if we had to restrain him, that he gives permission to be restrained. Because if he did not give that permission, and if we would have restrained him, we could have been arrested for unlawful kidnapping and restraint.
So they went to confession and communion, they got appropriate paperwork filled out and signed, and then they did the exorcism. Here, Riggy notes that it took several days and that it wasn't continuous, meaning they took breaks. Elsewhere, he indicates that it took 74 hours from beginning to end, meaning that it took almost 4 days. But it was successful, and Kevin was eventually freed from his demon.
Having participated in these 2 exorcisms, what has Riggy been doing in recent years?
As he mentioned in his bio, Riggy works with children who he refers to as children of the paranormal. He says he helps them and their families understand their paranormal gifts and abilities. He's also volunteered at a hospice that serves children who are dying at home. And as they're passing, he goes to their homes to help them cross over, which can involve communicating with the spirits who come to welcome them into the next life. He helps people with the grieving process, including the parents of the children, and he does past life regressions, by which I assume he means that he uses hypnosis to regress people into past lives. And as we said, that was a subject we discussed in episodes 93 and 94, as that was a technique used in the Bridey Murphy reincarnation case.
Apart from the hospice, how does he get the clients he works with?
As we noted, he often gives out his phone number on radio shows and podcasts that he appears on, and he invites people to call or text him if they want to talk. So those are the basic things to know about Robert Righi, and now we'll bring on Kenny Biddle, who investigated Righi, and see what he found out.
And just before we do that, we want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Father Leo H., Derek B., John N., Jennifer P., and Justin R. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you in part through the generous support of our sponsors, including Aaron Ferguson Electric and Automation at aaronv.com, AARONV.com, making connections for life for your automation and smart home needs in North and Central Florida. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you in part by Catechism Class, a dynamic weekly podcast journey through the Catechism of the Catholic Church by Greg and Jennifer Willits. It's the best book club, coffee talk, and faith study group all rolled into one. Find it in any podcast directory.
Kenny Biddle is a science enthusiast who investigates claims of paranormal experiences, equipment, photos, and video. He promotes science, critical thinking, and skepticism through his Facebook blog, I Am Kenny Biddle, and through his YouTube channel. He frequently hosts workshops on how to deconstruct and explain paranormal photography. He writes articles for the Skeptical Inquirer, and he's co-taught the course Parapsychology and Skepticism at the Rhine Education Center, which is where I first met him. Kenny Biddle, welcome to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Thank you, Jimmy. It's good to see you again, buddy.
Yeah. Before we get into your investigation of Robert Righi, I have a couple of questions. First, I've mentioned that you're a skeptic, but that can mean various things, from a person who tests unusual claims to a person who is totally closed to them. What does skepticism mean in your case, and what kind of religious philosophical worldview are you coming from, just so the listeners are aware?
Oh, that's a good question. So skepticism to me just means you have doubt about something. And I mean, we're all a little bit skeptical about something. And for me, I deal with a lot of paranormal claims, whether it's ghosts or hauntings or possession, all the way to Bigfoot, Loch Ness, and alien visitations and abductions. So I'm skeptical of the stories. I don't think the people are lying necessarily, but I have doubt that what they experienced is perceived in the way that they're relating to us. So I try to look into it. I try to look as deep as I can. I get all the information and, try to come to a logical conclusion based on the information, the data that we can uncover. So skepticism to me is not just dismissing things. I don't like doing that. I really have a hard time with people that do that kind of skepticism. I see it more as cynicism because I like to get my hands dirty. I like boots on ground. Let's investigate. Let's figure it out. And I think that's the best way to go.
In terms of worldview, so are you open to the idea that paranormal or supernatural experiences could be real, or are you like a convinced materialist that no, there is no paranormal, there is no supernatural?
I'm open to it. I'm definitely open to it. And I think that's what really drives me. Besides the whole Scooby-Doo effect, which is me just loving to solve mysteries, I love to unmask the old man Withers at the end of the episode. I love that. But deep down inside, I mean, I grew up with In Search Of, with Unsolved Mysteries. I grew up with those shows and they inspired me. I love the mystery. I couldn't believe that, these things actually happen in our world. And when I got to be an adult, a grown up, I was able to go out and explore this for myself. So there's always that thrill of the mystery and the adventure. So I'm always open to it. And I volunteer to go on ghost hunts and Bigfoot hunts, and even with the MUFON. I've tagged along with MUFON on their investigations to investigate claims where people say alien craft have landed and aliens came out. I love it. So yes, I am open to it. Unfortunately, all the cases that I have investigated usually turn out to be either completely solved or enough data shows that it's most likely a natural explanation for it rather than a supernatural explanation.
Okay. Now, I really enjoyed you as an instructor in the parapsychology and skepticism course. Out of curiosity, many of our listeners, kind of think of me in a teaching role because of Mysterious World's essentially a documentary, and I function as a teacher in a bunch of little capacities.
And it's great, by the way. I love your show. I'm just breaking in here to say I love it. I listen to it at work. I love it. I love your approach. I love your angle. I love your very calm way of speaking, and it makes me happy throughout the day. So I love listening to your show.
Oh, well, thank you. That's so kind. So I have this kind of a teacher-like role for a lot of the audience, but how did you find me as a student?
I like the kind of student that challenges me, and that's what you are. You're not confrontational. You are not the mean or quote unquote that student that always has to make a remark or always has to make a comment, and sometimes it's sarcastic. You asked really thought out questions and made me think, and I love that. I love that because I don't want to stereotype, but a lot of my audience, when I do lectures, public lectures, to whether it's 30 people or 3,000 people, many of them have a pretty hardcore belief in the paranormal. So the questions are the same over and over again. And they deal with, do you believe? Do you this? Do you think the EMF meter is a great ghost hunting tool or something like that? But your questions were really thought out, and you articulate things really well. I wish I could articulate questions the way you do. But unfortunately, I grew up in Philly. So you got my Philly accent, you got my attitude. Sometimes it comes out. But no, I enjoyed it. I really look forward. When I saw your hand go up or when you start to talk, I was like, oh, this is going to be good. All right, cool. Here we go. We're getting into it.
Okay, well, thank you. I was braced if you were gonna say, "Oh, you were a terrible student and you were dipping little girls' pigtails in inkwells." And
no, you were great.
Okay, so tell us, how did you first become involved in the Robert Righi case? What led you to investigate his claims, and how did you proceed in doing that?
So a friend of mine, Taryn Kerper, she does a podcast. It's a paranormal podcast called The Paranormal Brew. And she called me one night after her show. She had just interviewed the guy, and she called me up and said, "Hey, how do you investigate people?" And that was literally the question she asked. How do you investigate people? And I was like, well, it's a little bit more involved than just a 5-minute conversation, but I'm happy to go through some steps with you. And we started building back and forth. And she made a nice comment. It was like a Jedi training a Padawan. And I was very excited because I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, all right, you got it. We're in this, for the long haul now. But she started describing her interview and
With Robert Righi.
With Robert Righi, yeah. And talking about some of the things that he said, the claims that he made. And she was wondering how to verify whether they were true or not. And I said, well, I can help you with that. I can go through and look at this and look at that. I can look at documents and talking about calling University of Florida to talk to the registrar down there to see, confirming his graduation, his degrees. And it just spiraled out from there. She would do a great job at going out and finding other interviews that he was a part of and then sending me links so that I could review them, which that's probably the most difficult part of the job, is listening to hours and hours and hours of,
I know the primary research of getting familiar with the
Yes.
data is always the hardest part before you dissect it. And you listen to like more than 24 podcasts that this guy was on, which is a phenomenal number. I mean, he's really been all over the place. And each one of these was like an hour to 2 or 2.5 hours long. That was a lot of work.
Yeah. Luckily, you can have the option of listening at like 1.5 or 2 speed, double the speed. So that's what I was doing, listening to but it still took a lot of time. And I also have the luxury at my job where I can listen to podcasts during the day as I work. So that's what I was doing for like 2 weeks straight. I listened to Robert was in my head, literally listening to him do interviews over and over and over again.
And you then like built up a timeline of the podcasts that he was on and the claims that he made and so forth. And eventually you wrote an article for the Skeptical Inquirer, which we'll have a link to so people can read it.
Awesome. But yeah, that came a little bit later. I usually write down notes. I have notebooks everywhere. Totally old school. I will write down everything from I have a pocket notebook that goes in my back pocket to the smaller notebooks like this to the bigger college ruled notebooks. But I started writing down quotes. And as I listened to more and more podcasts, I was realizing like, oh, he's changed his story there, or he said something different. And then I would have to go back and I'm like, oh, what was the podcast? So I did start writing everything down, and I have timestamps in the outline, the date the podcast was aired, the name of the podcast, the timestamps where he made quotes, certain claims, and just went back and forth and started comparing and saying, oh, wow, there's a lot of contradictions here. Mm-hmm. So now we can dig into this really well. Now once I had that timeline and a list of contradictions, now I started going through piece by piece. Let's call the college. Let's call a priest that was involved. Let's call this person, and just went down the line.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you found suspicious was concerned Riggy's first apparition of Abraham Lincoln when he was 4 years old. And he's told that story on a number of podcasts, but on Stories of the Supernatural, he told it a little differently. And so let's listen to that and hear what he had to say.
When I was 4 years old, I had my first apparition.
Wow.
It scared the out of me.
Was it a stranger? It wasn't a family member or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
It wasn't at all. It was someone that I didn't know. But this person came to me, and I had fallen asleep that night out on the sofa. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, and here comes that 3 o'clock,
Yes.
The bewitching hour, as we say.
Yes.
And all at once, this person was standing in front of me, paralyzed. I was scared. I was 4 years old.
Oh my God.
I didn't know. It was a gentleman, and he was very kind and very soft-spoken to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was scared because all at once I woke up thinking that someone was looking at me, and even at 4 years old, I could feel things like that.
Right.
Didn't understand it, of course. And when I opened my eyes, here this gentleman was standing in front of me. And like I said, he was very loving and very kind. And he was whispered softly to me and told me that everything was going to be okay, and that to me to help and to guide me on my way through this paranormal or spiritual. And at 4 years old, everyone, I had no idea what paranormal
I was about
meant.
to say, that's pretty heavy for a 4-year-old. Yeah, God.
Yeah. I was scared. I almost peed myself. And I tried to call out for my mommy, and I couldn't call for my mom. And I remember the gentleman, and his name was Lucas. He finally told me his name was Lucas. And Lucas calmed me down and again said, everything will be fine. And I remember his parting words were, follow your spirit, follow your passion.
So what leapt out at you about that where it was different than what he had originally said in the other podcasts?
So
because there's some similarities and some differences there.
Right. There's a lot of similarities. And sometimes he has to go to the bathroom. Sometimes he just woke up. But
on the couch.
On the couch. Yeah. That didn't really concern me. What concerned me was that in the majority of other podcast interviews that he's done, the spirit that he claims to see is Abraham Lincoln. And he recognized him right away. And I mean, in most interviews, he actually makes a joke because he's like, well, I'm from Illinois. And everybody has a picture of Lincoln in their house. That's the way it is. So I knew him immediately. I recognized him. But he never says Lincoln spoke to him. Pretty much Lincoln just nods at him. And Robert takes that as a affirmation of his powers and his supernatural abilities and that he can do all this stuff and everything's going to be fine. So he repeats that over and over again. And then in this one, I actually listened to it twice because I heard it and I was like, wait a minute, that's not Abraham Lincoln. That's Lucas. That's a completely different name. He's claiming he doesn't know this person, which that sticks out to me. I mean,
whereas he did know who Lincoln was.
Right. And at 4 years old. At 4 years old, if I woke up at 3 a.m. and to a stranger in my house, I would be screaming. I mean, that's just me. I would be screaming. And mom, dad, help. Not, oh, okay. Lucas, a nice stranger. He's going to come talk to me. Great. So yeah, that's a big contradiction there. That's where the story. I think that's the earliest time that he talks about it. I believe that was in 2019. And I had one other podcast that I had listened to that was from 2018. So like 3 months before, in December of 2018. And I don't think he mentions, I don't have a notation here in my notes about him mentioning Abraham Lincoln. So I think this is the first time he tells his origin story, at least from the podcast that I found. And then after that, it changes. It goes to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know why.
So we have the two basic narratives. They're both about his first paranormal experience, his first apparition. They both occur at 4 years old. They both occur at 3 a.m. In one version, he wakes up and is frozen with fear on the couch. He sees a person he does not know, and then that person tells him his name is Lucas, and then encourages him on this paranormal path. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the other narrative, he wakes up and gets out of bed and goes towards the bathroom. He sees Abraham Lincoln, who he does know. Abraham Lincoln does not say anything, but nods supportively to him, which he says he didn't know what that meant at the time, but later he took it as affirmation that he should go on this paranormal path. And then he talks about getting in bed with his parents, which he doesn't mention here. So
that changes too.
Oh, does it? Okay.
So that changes
because he just didn't mention it here.
Sometimes he calls out or he doesn't. So I don't have those notes on there because that was a minor detail, which I should have noted, but I didn't. But at one point he says that he just went to bed. He bypasses going to his parents altogether. One version, his mom's home, but his dad's not. And I think Dad is working late or has a second job or something like that. In
the one that Dom and I played at the top of this episode, his dad is definitely home because he records his dad asking, what did he want? What did Lincoln want? And laughing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's another change.
And when you listen to a few in a row, even that changes. As in, like, sometimes they laugh at him and say, no, you didn't see anything. And then other times they're really supportive and then tells him to go to bed. And then, of course, Mom the next morning takes Robert to her mother, so Robert's grandmother, and they both go to see this old woman
who's a bruja.
The White Witch.
Yeah.
And even that, I don't have the details in front of me, but even that changes slightly, the details on that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a constant theme. These details change over time.
Now, go ahead.
They're just red flags. You know, a story that you know well, that you lived through. Yes, I can see once in a while the story, the details will change, but this gentleman has been saying this over and over and over again since 2018, well, the end of 2018 to now. So for 4 years, he's been reciting the same stories. You would think they would become consistent, but they do not. They keep changing. So go ahead. Sorry.
Now Riggy claims to have 2 master's degrees, one in forensic psychiatry and one in clinical social work. But after listening to him on podcasts, you began to suspect that he wasn't a psychologist at all. What made you think that?
I have the pleasure of knowing several psychologists, and I speak to them often. I consult with them on some of the projects that I do. And I even do a podcast with one of them. And you get used to I don't want to say this wrong here. There's a few things that stood out to me. One was the way he spoke. Not that unintelligent people or intelligent people speak differently. Sometimes they do. He wasn't using the proper terminology. He's describing psychological conditions, or trying to. He wasn't using the proper terms, and he would often say "and stuff." That a child was suffering from hallucinations and or stuff, and the "and stuff" just bothered me. It was like, well, somebody that knew what they were talking about should be able to articulate that, the symptoms, the signs, and what clinical terms there are for it. And he wasn't using any of this. He wasn't using proper terms. He was trying to almost, like, I know I'm going all over the place here, but it kind of made me feel like I was watching an episode of CSI where they really sensationalize things, the science behind it. And it doesn't really happen like that. When you talk to forensic interviewers or forensic scientists, they're like, no, it doesn't happen like that. Or it doesn't happen that quickly. Or, there's so much more work and so much more time, and we don't get to it, things like that. This wasn't what I was getting from Righi. I was getting somebody that probably watched TV and was borrowing terms or definitions and descriptions from a dramatization rather than real life and academia. So that kind of threw me. He wasn't talking the way I would expect him to talk.
In your article, you point out that he even misuses the term for a field he allegedly has a master's degree in. He claims to have a master's in forensic psychiatry, and then he misdefines what that is. In an interview he did with KZUM Radio, he had this to say.
Robert, tell us about being a forensic psychologist. What is that title?
Well, forensics basically means that medical technology taken into the courtroom. That's all it means. That's all it is. It is a fancy name just for that, but it is even more detailed in what it also entails. It entails working with the criminal mind.
Okay, so forensics does not itself have anything to do with medical technology. And even if we are generous and say, well, he meant forensic psychiatry,
Right.
Forensic psychiatry doesn't have anything to do with bringing medical technology into a courtroom. It seems like he's confusing forensic psychology with other branches of forensic science, like what you see on TV shows, like police procedurals, to go to your point, which can involve things like running medical tests to determine blood type or DNA analysis or something. But that's not what forensic psychology is it?
No. So I did look it up, and I went to the American Psychological Association and got their definition of it. And it says they describe it as the distinctiveness of forensic psychology is advanced knowledge and skills reflecting the intersection of legal theory, procedures, and law with clinical issues, practice, and ethics, which is a little bit different than saying it's basically medical technology taken into the courtroom. That's not how it is. The more I understood it, the more it was legal issues. And I don't want to get into that.
Is someone competent to care for a child, or are they competent to stand trial, or are they legally insane?
Yeah, I was going to say I didn't want to get into it too much because I'm not one. I wasn't trained in it, so I don't want to speak out of term. But yeah, I mean, it was a big difference than what he described on that interview. So that also told me, like, that was a big red flag. Like, this guy does not know what he's doing. He's taking it from TV, and kind of like what you said, it's almost like he's watching TV and he's grouping a whole bunch of fields together and saying, "Oh, this is what I'm doing," and it's not what he's doing.
When you first asked me about Riggy, you sent me a link to one of his podcast appearances, and listening to it, I noticed he misused another psychological term.
That was good.
In this case, the term was echolalia, which refers to when one person repeats what another person is saying. You know, like you see kids doing this, like, stop talking like me. Stop talking like me. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And that's why it's called echolalia, which means echo talking in Greek. It's a psychological term because repeating statements that other people make is associated with psychological conditions and developmental conditions, including for like children who don't grow out of this phase, because it is normal to have some of that as kids. But Riggy had a completely different understanding of what echolalia is, and he repeated it on more than one occasion. On our paranormal podcast, he says,
There's something called echolalia. Do you know what that is?
What is it? I don't.
Echolalia. We have two sets of vocal cords. One of them is dormant, and the other one we're using tonight, right? Okay. The demon can use both vocal cords at the same time. And it is incredible when that happens, because like I'm talking to you this very moment, and then all at once another voice will be coming out at almost the same time that I'm talking. You know what I mean? And that's called echolalia. Okay, Tibetan monks have learned how to do that when they chant. So if you ever hear a Tibetan monk, and
that's chanting, why it sounds like that.
It's called echolalia.
Yeah, so what he's referring to there is a practice known as throat singing, and it is used, it's sometimes called Tuvan throat singing because they do it in Tuva, and it is a kind of weird vocal quality. It's not really exactly the way he describes it, but in terms of how it's produced, but it's a perfectly normal human ability if you train yourself to do it, and it's used in different cultures. So it's not just Tibetan. It's used in other places in the world, but it does create a kind of odd vocal effect, but it has nothing to do with the psychological term echolalia, which is if he's got a master's in psychology, he should know the psychological meaning of this term. So I found that very suspicious.
Yeah, and that was the good point that you brought up. When we talked about it before I published, you brought that up. I wanted to add that. I wanted to include it, but I couldn't. The article was just too long already.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to be part of a lecture that I'm going to put together and include this case, because I think this is a really good case to talk about and study and let people know not only the dangers of certain people out there, but, you know, what I did and who I reached out to, like you, about advice on how to proceed and how to approach people. So, yeah.
So, with these doubts about hearing this guy with a master's in psychology misusing psychological terms, it'd be reasonable to check his degrees. And at least one of his master's degrees is said to have been granted by the University of Florida in 1980. And, you know, universities don't like it when people claim to have been granted a degree by them, like that they've never granted. Oh, yeah, I got my doctorate at this university. And so they'll, if you contact the university, they'll confirm, did we grant this guy a degree? So did you check on his degrees, and what did you find?
I did. I looked into it. The first thing I did was call the University of Florida, because that's where he said he got his degree. And the way he says it very, it's very rehearsed. And he says that he has two master's degrees, one in forensic psychology and one in clinical social work from the University of Florida. And that's the way he kind of flows and says it. So I assume that both are from the University of Florida, because he makes no mention of any other university. So
even if only one of them was from University of Florida, they'd still have him on record for that.
Right. So I contacted the registrar at the University of Florida, and I sent them an email. I explained exactly what I was doing, what I was looking for, and they gave me a response. They emailed me back and said that they had no one by that name on record, but there is a caveat, because let me make sure. Please be aware, if a student was born in 1955 or earlier, their record may need to be moved to our online system, meaning that it wasn't updated to their online system yet. And Riggy was born in 1954. So for it to be in their online system, he would have had to actually call the university and have it transferred. So if he never did that, and assuming that he does have a master's degree from them, if he never did that, then it wouldn't be online and I wouldn't be able to find it. And that's the most that they could do for me. They could not go any further.
So this records check was kind of inconclusive, but it did not support his claims.
Exactly.
Go ahead. No, I was going to move to a new question.
Oh, well, the licensor, is that where you're going? Licensor?
Yeah, because that is where I was going to go. So in October or November of 2021, Riggy said on the Bigfoot and the Bunny podcast that he was licensed in 9 states as a forensic psychologist and a clinical social worker. And that's something else that should leave a public paper trail. So were you able to verify that he had such licenses, 9 of them?
So this is interesting. This is a really interesting part, because yes, on that show, he says that he has 9 licenses. He's licensed in 9 states. Yet, and I'm trying to find it here. So that was in October of 2021 where he makes that statement. And then later on in January of 2022, he says, and I quote here, "I am licensed to practice psychology, forensic psychology, particularly in 10 states." So he upped it.
Another state.
Mm-hmm. And then let's see.
A week later, he says on the Shadow Zone podcast that I have a master's in forensic psychology and clinical social work. I am licensed in 12 different states. I got licensed for the state of South Dakota. So he gained 3 extra licenses in the matter of 3 months? Yeah, in 3 months, which is, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, after talking to several psychologists about this, it's not an easy process. It's very difficult. And if you're going outside of your home state where you practice, it's useless unless you're actually, like an example, my friend Tim's a forensic interviewer, Tim Vickers, and he's a co-host of one of my shows, but he brought it up that for me, I'm in Philadelphia, so I'm very close to Jersey and New York, New Jersey and Delaware. So if I wanted to get licensed in 2 other states, it would probably be beneficial for me if I was going that route, because they're so close and I could practice in all 3 states without much travel at all. I mean, I can reach New Jersey in 20 minutes. I can reach Delaware in half an hour. So it's not a big deal. But
if you don't have that convenience of being in a tri-state area, then it's useless. So I went ahead and checked anyway. So what I did, you can go online.
Before we do that, actually, you also uncovered that in another podcast, he claimed to have 15 licenses, be licensed in 15 states, although I understand that podcast has been taken down.
Yes. Unfortunately, there was, as we were investigating this more and more, we were contacting podcast hosts. And when I say we, me and Taryn, who originally brought this to my attention. And after learning about some of the stuff that we found, several podcasts took that episode down where he was interviewed. So that's kind of good. It's good and bad. It's good because they took it down, but it's bad because it had information in it that we could have used. But I can't quote that. I can't source it. So
what did you find when you did checking, and how did you check?
So the first thing I did was contact Florida, the state of Florida, and the state of South Dakota, because these were two that he mentioned directly. And I contacted the State Department, Department of Health for each of them and asked, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm investigating this gentleman. He claims to have been licensed in your state as a psychologist. Is there any record of this? Can I get confirmation of this? And from Florida, I got a response back from the Department of Health, the Office of Communications, and they confirmed that they were unable to find any evidence of a Robert Righi ever holding a license with the Department of Health in the state of Florida, which blows a lot of his claims out of the water here. Because, and I don't know if you're going to touch on this later, but he claims to have been a criminal profiler in the state of Florida for 35 years.
Oh, we're going to go there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So that kind of kills that. But then I also reached out to the state of South Dakota and got the same thing, same response. They said there is no one by that name in their database. So I took it a step farther, and you can go online and actually check with each state for current and past licensors. So I went to every state. I mean, all 50 states. All 50 states. I have, for your viewers that are watching it, so I went through every state and marked off whether he had a license or not, and everything came up negative. So no licenses in any database whatsoever.
You also discovered that with a master's degree, because he doesn't claim to have a doctorate, but you discovered that with a master's degree, he might not qualify for such a license in Florida. Is that correct?
That is correct. According to the Florida Board of Psychology, an application for licensure by examination requires more than a master's degree. Quote, U.S. trained applicants, submission of your official doctoral level, PhD, this is PSID or EDD. I'm not good at all.
Doctorate of Education, okay. Doctor of Philosophy, and so forth.
And then transcripts in psychology as proof of graduation from a program accredited by the American Psychological Association. So yeah, he needed more than a master's degree to get a license. He needed a doctoral program and proof of that. So I don't think he had that, because he never mentioned it. And I did call him. I don't know if you're going to touch on this later, but I did call him. Okay. We'll get to that when we get to that.
Riggy also, now you mentioned he claims to have worked as a criminal profiler in Florida for 35 years for both the FBI and the Florida Attorney General. So if he graduated in 1980, he would have been working as a criminal profiler in Florida until 2015. Which means he would live in Florida.
Yes.
During that period. Did you find anything in your research that would contradict the idea he was in Florida during that period?
So I did. And this was probably the part that I hesitated the most with, because I don't like going that deep with an investigation, but I did find that he has a criminal record. And the criminal record comes up between, let's see, it has him between 1992 and 2002.
Yeah. Actually, let's put a pin in that for a second.
Okay.
On a more basic level, like one of the things you can do in background checks is like find out where people lived.
Okay.
And based on research that you did, you found a bunch of his residences. And but he did live in Florida between 1988 and 1991. So he could have been working as a profiler in Florida then. But then in 1998, he moves to Iowa. He also lives for a good period in Illinois, in Peoria, Illinois. He was in Arizona. He was in various other places that you could document he was living other than Florida in this time frame.
Right.
Which would pose challenges for how is he working as a profiler in Florida if he's not even in Florida.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and these years that we have him, he was in Florida for 3 years, from 88 to 91, but we have him from 95 to 2003 in various places. Illinois, Peoria is where he's from. That's where he was born. And then Phoenix, Arizona, and then back to Peoria. So he's been all over. And from my understanding, he's also lived with several people. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I don't know if we mentioned it while we were recording, but he did an interview with a friend of his who had mentioned that he lived with her, the friend, for a time. And
not in Florida.
Not in Florida. No, that was in, where was that? That was in, I hate dead air. It was a radio program that he was doing, and I have it. Where do I have it? Oh, I have it in red. I have it, all this stuff highlighted. There were so many notes here. So let's see, interviewing. Nope, that was wrong. Oh, a woman that they worked together in 1978 at Woodward, Iowa State Hospital. So he was in Iowa in 1978.
Okay, and that would also cast doubt on his claims to have gotten a master's from the University of Florida in 1980, because master's programs are typically 2 years long. And if he graduated in 1980 and took the typical 2 years, he would have been beginning his program in Florida in 1978 when he was allegedly living with this woman and actually several other people, some kind of communal arrangement in another state in Iowa in 1978.
There's also the added bonus of he didn't graduate. Let me backtrack and say this differently. He took on extra classes. He claims to have taken on extra classes. So he stayed an extra 2 years. So his original graduation date should have been 78.
Okay, so he would have been then working on his master's from 76 to 80.
Yeah. So there's a lot of discrepancies, as you can see. But I mean, this interview, it comes from him. I mean, he's sitting right there talking, and it puts him in Iowa during the time when he was supposed to be at school and learning this. So, yeah, I have a big problem with that too.
You also checked his work history, because you can frequently find out what people were doing for a living during a particular period. What did you find out during this period that he claims to have been working as a criminal profiler? What was he actually doing according to the records you found?
So it looks like from 1980 up until about 2012, he was working various jobs. From like a Dynatech to he was sales. He was doing outside sales. And I think towards the end of like 2012, he was working for a company where he was doing sales from home, or he was taking a lot of time off. I know there's actually a court case online that you can bring up where he sued his former employee because he had taken so much time and they fired him. But he claims he was taking care of his mother, and which he probably was. I don't want to speak anything bad about that, but he took the Family Leave Act without notifying his employer. He just decided that he was going to take it and didn't inform anyone. He just didn't show up. So that's what his defense is during the court case.
So going down the jobs that you were able to uncover, it looks like between 1980 and 1982, so this would have been right after his master's degree, if that happened. He was working as a quality engineer at something called Intercon Engineering. He then became an inside sales accountant rep for SunSource. He became an outside sales engineering rep for several different companies. He later worked as post office support. He worked as an office manager. And then he also had this other kind of at-home sales job that you mentioned. And none of these are remotely in the fields of psychology or clinical social work.
Right. And the last one there, it was a company called XPAC. And I spoke to a former coworker of his, somebody who lives in his town that knew him, that had run a ghost hunting team that Riggy was a part of. So they knew each other. And this XPAC company is actually a company that packs tractor supplies. They packaged them and then ship them out. So that's what he was doing. He was a line worker packing tractors supplies. So nothing to do with social work, nothing to do with psychology, nothing to do with anything that he claims he has the education background for.
And of course, if you are a criminal profiler, now they say it takes one to know one. And so there might be some advantages to being a criminal and then being a criminal profiler. But I suspect the FBI and the Florida Attorney General probably don't want their profilers to have a criminal record. And you discovered that he did over a period of about a decade. What can you tell us there?
So, yeah, I went digging and I was able to find from Illinois State a record. He has a record, and there's various things here. So you don't get too many details, and I won't get into them because I just don't have them all, but you have the basic idea. So he was charged for theft several times. He was charged for
failure to appear, false statements. And it was false statements to obtain credit.
Yes.
So there's something like lying on a credit application and getting caught.
Something like that. But the theft, I think, was from what I gather, it was pretty significant. One was not too much, but the other one was, I think, was over $5,000 value. So I don't know exactly what the details were. There was one charge for interference with official acts. And throughout
he served the longest time for that. That was 8. So some of these were one night or a couple of weeks or 3 months, but that was 18 months.
Yes. And there was something that come up. I think somebody did approach him and said, what about this criminal history? And he denied it all, saying that he never did any of this. That was a different person. They do have on some of these, and I did post in my article, I did have a screenshot of the list of infractions.
We'll have that too in the video version of the podcast.
Okay, good. And there's on the left side, you can see the case number. And if you click on it, because it's a blue highlight hyperlink, if you clicked on them and went to a little bit more information, and 4 of the 6 of these have mugshots. So it was definitely him. You can't deny it. It's definitely him. You see it over a decade of him growing and going through different hairstyles, but it's definitely him. You can match the facial features. I mean, it's definitely him. So there's no denying that. And that just puts him in Illinois during this decade.
Between 1992 and 2002.
Right.
Yeah. And he was in jail. He was incarcerated 7 times during that decade for up to 18 months at a time.
Yeah.
So not really the kind of person that law enforcement would typically hire as a criminal profiler, from my understanding of things.
No.
Maybe I'm wrong about that.
I'm going to agree with you.
Now, he also claims that when he was about to graduate in 1980, that he arranged for an interview with Ted Bundy. And Ted Bundy had been caught in 1979. In fact, if you research the Ted Bundy case, it looked like he had a desire to get caught, that he had a desire to get caught and be executed. And that's why he went to Florida, because Florida and Texas at the time were the 2 states most likely to execute you if they caught you. And so he goes to Florida in 1978. He gets caught he commits some crimes. He gets caught in 1979. And then by 1980, he had been convicted and given 3 death sentences. So he was incarcerated in Florida in 1980. And for fans of Mysterious World, yes, we will talk about Ted Bundy in the future. But he was incarcerated in Florida in 1980. So that much of Riggy's story checks out. But what did you find out about the rest of his story about interviewing Ted Bundy?
So he has some discrepancies, and these are I'm going to try to explain them the best I can because they do get a little confusing. But in one version, I'll give you the basic, version here, is that in one version, he approaches his professor or the chair or the head of the department. Again, depending on which interview.
We played a clip of this when this is from 2021. We played a clip of this earlier in the show. So Go ahead.
So it goes from him approaching the staff of the university and asking, "Hey, I want to interview Ted Bundy. He's only like an hour or 2 away. I want to do this." And they
this
give
is
him
at the end of his master's program in 1980.
Right at the end. And he gets permission to do the interview if he can get permission from everyone involved. And Riggy tells us that he sent letters to Ted Bundy, his lawyer, and the warden at the prison. And that, again, depending on the interview, it's either a week later or several weeks later or something like that he gets responses from all 3. He gets letters in the mail from all 3 granting permission. So they set it up to where it's Riggy, another male student, and then 3 female students.
All in psychology.
All in psychology, 5 in total that are going to go do this. So then he goes along with the story, tells about it, or tells us what goes on, and that gets graphic. I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah.
So in a different version, here, let me see. The original version.
It was from 2019 on Stories of the Supernatural.
Yes, thank you. So he says a slightly different thing. He says 6 months into the program. So that's already a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he's 6 months into a 2-year program.
That he took 4 years to complete.
Yeah. As opposed to the end of the 2-year program. So that's a discrepancy. 6 months into the program, I was asked by the dean of psychology department or the chair of the department. That's what his quote is. So that these are his words. I was asked by the dean of psychology department or the chair of department. So he's not sure.
Yeah, that's a so I mean, if he said dean, that would be a slip of a tongue because departments don't have deans. They have chairs.
So he was asked if he'd be interested in going and interviewing Ted Bundy.
So he didn't have to write anybody in this version. The department head had already arranged it.
Right. The chair, whoever the chair is, because he doesn't give a name. I really wish he gave a name, but he didn't. The chair said, "Robert, it's going to be you and 5 other students."
Not 4.
Not 4. 5 other students that have the experience with the realm of psychology. Now, this is weird. I feel weird saying this because this is Riggy's flair for the dramatic. It will be you and 5 other students that have the experience with the realm of psychology. That's a catchphrase of his. He likes saying the realm of psychology. But he also says that there were 3 gentlemen and there were 2 ladies, 2 female students. So now that number has switched.
Mm-hmm. It was 3 females and 1 male. Yes. Now it's 2 females and 3 males.
Yes. Yeah. So that changed. And I mean, these might be minor changes to some people, but to me, they stand out. They stand out as a story that's not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that story evolves over time, over how many times he tells it. It changes with each telling. And again, it gets into areas I don't want to get into.
Yeah, well, it's something, I mean, people can have bad memories. They can have failing memories over time, but there should be ways to check? You know, I mean, they keep visitor logs at prisons. Were you able to find anything out about that?
Unfortunately, not. I did contact the prison. I talked to a Jeffrey McClellan, who is the assistant warden. And he informed me that unfortunately they don't have any records from that far back. Okay. So they couldn't confirm or deny the visitation. Mm-hmm. And he really didn't say anything else. I tried to press for like more questions, like, you know, how would one go about setting up an interview like that with somebody like that and stuff. But he's like, no, we don't have any records. I can't help you. So, I mean, he was nice, professional, but unfortunately it didn't lead anywhere.
It's still suspicious, though. I mean, if you're in a program for 4 years or even 2 years, but you build up to this as kind of like your final project or something, meeting with Ted Bundy would be a big thing for someone getting a master's in psychology. You would remember, did this happen at the beginning or the end? And did you have to do the legwork to write all the people, or did someone offer you a slot on the team?
There would also be lots of notes.
Mm-hmm.
I would suspect. I mean, if I interview somebody, I'm always writing down. One of the stipulations that Riggy tells us that he had was that he was not allowed to take notes. No notes, no pictures, nothing like that. He couldn't do anything. He could just come in and talk.
Sherlock Holmes deals with that in the case of the missing evidence. Yeah.
Yes.
Anytime someone says we had this, we could have had this evidence, but it's all gone, or we weren't allowed to take anything that would be evidence, immediately suspicious of that.
Yeah. And that really bothered me, because when I did I started looking into it a little bit, like Ted Bundy.
What's the point of interviewing Ted Bundy if you can't take notes for psychological insights that'll be useful in a paper or something? Right.
Someone that's going through and getting their master's in psychology would understand that your memory sucks. I mean, you're not going to remember everything in detail. Even if you try, I mean, you have to write it down. You have to record it somehow. And there was a reporter that had snuck in, and I forget his name. He's the one guy I think that actually interviewed Ted Bundy in jail, and wrote an expose for I forget what magazine that he had. I don't have those notes in front of me, but he was in, and I think he had to go undercover and say he was part of the defense team, because they wouldn't let just a reporter come in. So he went under that idea, and he was able to take copious amounts of notes, like and record it. This reporter, and again, I apologize for not having the name, but he apparently has a whole bunch of audio tapes, cassette tapes of this interview. So I don't understand why there would be a stipulation that he couldn't take notes or record it.
Yeah.
And even if you couldn't at the time, I would have a notebook outside in the car and write everything down as soon as I could. But we have nothing.
So in the 2019 version of his story, from Stories of the Supernatural, he places this 6 months into his master's program, which would either be 1976 or 1978. Right. And at neither of those times was Ted Bundy even in custody, because he wasn't caught until 1979. And but then in 2021, he's now moved it to his interview with Ted Bundy to 1980 at the end of his master's program. Do you think he shifted that because he realized somebody might do the math and realize he was claiming to have interviewed Bundy when Bundy was not yet in custody?
It's definitely possible. And I think you're onto something there. When I go back and forth and I think about the audience that his interviews will bring in, they are probably mostly believers who will not fact check anything.
Yeah, and there'll be some crime fans in the audience, though.
Yeah. I mean, when you first brought that up, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if he's smart enough to do that. But the more I thought about it, as we've been talking tonight, I mean, yeah, you're right. He probably did. Somebody probably pointed it out to him and said, "Hey, your interview, I heard it, but he wasn't in jail then." And that clicked, and he changed it for the next interview. So I think you're right. I think you're onto something there.
Okay. Now, he also talks on his podcasts about his involvement in the exorcisms of Kevin and Vivian. In the podcast you listened to, he says he was convinced that Kevin was possessed when the demon was able to preternaturally reveal that Riggy had been adopted, that this wasn't a publicly known fact. He says it wasn't on his Facebook page and so forth. How did you investigate this claim, and what did you find?
So I employed a very, very deep dive technical method to figure out how someone could possibly obtain that information. I went on Facebook. That's what I did.
I love how in your article you say, I employed a deviously complex research technique honed by my years of investigational insight. I scrolled through Riggy's Facebook page.
That's it. I cannot tell you how many things I have uncovered by just going through someone's Facebook account. Because I say this all the time, we are not anywhere near as private as we think we are. And there's so much information out there you can find. And the first thing I did was, well, in one of the interviews, and I forget how many or which ones, but he does say that, you know, I am adopted, and there's no way he could have known that. It's not even on Facebook. And that clicked. I was like, all right, well, let's see.
Yeah. So now, he made that. Apparently, he indicates the exorcism took place in 2017, based on various factors, he says. But you found something on his Facebook page in 2015 that did mention adoption, right?
Yes. Yes. And again, various things that he said were like, during one interview, he would say, well, this happened 2 years ago, or this happened a year and a half ago. And by the date of the interview itself, you know, you backtrack and it's like, all right, 2017, this is when it happened. So as I scrolled through, and I mean, it sounds easy, but you're sitting here like scroll.
Yeah.
But in 2015, specifically November 23rd of 2015, Robert posted on his Facebook page, which is still public, that I am so very grateful, so very blessed by being adopted by my aunt and uncle. They chose to adopt me, and I was taken away from my biological parents by the state of Illinois because of severe neglect. If it wasn't for my wonderful and loving Italian family, and especially my Italian grandmother. So there's a lot more information here, but this is gold. This is gold. I mean, everything you need. If I was a cold reader, or a hot reader, a psychic hot reader, this is gold.
We should explain that term for people who may not be aware. Cold reading is where someone picks up clues about you. It's a stage magician's trick. They simulate like telepathy or other psychic functioning by picking up clues about you and making deductions on the spot. Or they throw out general statements they know someone in the audience is going to fit. Hot reading is where they research the people in the audience in advance. And that frequently these days means going on Facebook and looking for obscure things about people that they can then use as part of their performance. And this would be cold reading. So if hot reading. So if Kevin is even a real person, and he wanted, so we're assuming Kevin's a real person, and he wanted to convince Riggy that he had a demon possessing him, he could have hot read Riggy and gone on his Facebook page looking for obscure things like, 2 years ago he mentioned this. I bet he doesn't remember mentioning that, so I'll tell him that he's adopted.
Yeah. And I mean, timing is everything too. This post was in November of 2015. So it's at the end of the year. It's not exactly 2 years, but I mean, it's close enough that if you were just scrolling by, and by the time I got to this post, Riggy wasn't posting as much as he does today. So, I mean, in 2017, if I was looking for somebody and scroll through it, it probably would have only taken me a minute or so to get to this post. Whereas it took me probably 15 minutes to go through and find this 15, 20 minutes that most people won't do. But yeah, I was able to find that. And that told me right away, like, all right, it is posted. It is out there. So that kind of negates what he said, that there was no way he could have found out. There is a way.
Now, it's at this point that I briefly come into the story. Why did you decide to contact me?
Well, because he says that he was part of 2 exorcisms, as you mentioned. And I wanted to confirm whether he was or not. And I didn't know. I mean, I know how to directly do that. You call the diocese, you call the archdiocese, you call the people involved and say, hey, did this happen? But I wasn't sure how to approach it. Mm-hmm. And I had recently talked to you. We recently met because of the Lloyd Auerbach's course. And then I think you were on my podcast for, I think before that. Yeah, I think you were just on there and we had talked, and it was great. I mean, you're a very knowledgeable person and more in tune with this than I was. So that's part of my job, consult experts, and I saw you as an expert consultant on this. And I said, hey, I have to contact the Diocese of Peoria and I have to contact the Archdiocese of Chicago. Do you know how to do this? Like, who do I talk to? Who do I ask for? How do I approach this? I don't want to just call and say, hey, I'm checking on an exorcism.
Yeah.
What's up? I didn't know how to approach it. So I reached out to you.
And you also sent me a link to one of the Riggy podcasts, which I listened to, and I gave you my initial impressions. And one of the things that he talked about was the priest that he said performed the exorcisms. And here's what he said also on our paranormal podcast.
The priest who did the exorcist, Father Michael, I don't know if you heard of Father Michael, but he is from Loyola Medical Center and University in Maywood, Illinois. He's a Jesuit. He is the same priest that did the exorcism on the house, the demon house that Zach Bagans had bought in Indiana. Okay. And so I got to meet Father Michael and assisted him with 5 other priests and seminarians.
Now, you'd already identified this Father Michael as Father Michael Maginot, who Riggy says on podcast is a good friend of his. And while we were talking, I looked him up and I immediately found Father Maginot's webpage on St. Stephen Martyr Catholic Church in Maryville, Indiana. So that much of his story did check out. Father Michael, or Father Maginot, is a real person. Right. Riggy also said that the exorcism took place not in Father Maginot's church in Maryville, but in a Jesuit monastery attached to Loyola University Medical Center. Right. I then suggested some ways that you could approach Father Maginot and the diocese that might be, productive ways of eliciting information. What happened when you did that?
So unfortunately, I didn't get any information from either Chicago or Peoria.
And I'm not really surprised by that because for confidentiality reasons, a diocese would be very hesitant to confirm something like that. Right.
The only thing that bothered me a little bit, I did call the Diocese of Peoria, Illinois, where he lives, and I left messages. So I didn't actually talk to anyone. I left messages twice and never received any reply, which again, I mean, based on our conversation, I was kind of expecting that. However, when I called the Archdiocese of Chicago, I did talk to somebody and they assured me that it was going to come. Actually, you know what? No, I'm getting it mixed up. I'm sorry. Archdiocese of Chicago never called me back. The Diocese of Peoria did. I did talk to somebody there. I apologize. I messed that up. I talked to the bishop's secretary and I called once, talked to her, left a message, and she assured me that he would get back to me. And then I called again a week later and talked to the same woman. She remembered me, and because nobody really calls about exorcism, or it's probably a rare occurrence. But she's like, yeah, you called last week, right? He has all your information. He's going to call you back. And never did. So that upset me a little bit because I understand if you don't want to give out information, that's one thing. Tell me, I can respect that. But don't tell me you're going to call me back and then not. I think that's just unprofessional, and that's just from me. So I didn't get anywhere with either diocese.
And there could be any number of reasons. I mean, bishops can forget stuff. I don't know how many emails I have not been able to return just because I forget.
I get it. I understand that. I mean, I guess it's just like it's easy to ignore an email or a message on your phone, but when I get that direct confirmation, like, yeah, they're going to call you back.
It does raise expectations.
Yeah. I was a little bit hopeful, but still not totally. So then I reached out directly to Father Michael because I did find a phone number for him. I was able to call his parish, which is funny because I think in the clip that you played where Riggy is talking about him, Riggy refers to him as a priest that's associated as a Jesuit priest associated with that Loyola. Am I saying
University Medical Center,
yes,
Loyola,
which he's not. So that was incorrect. But I did talk to Father Michael, and
yeah, in fact, if I recall correctly, Father Michael has a history in canon law and has done work in that capacity, like for his diocese, but not medical work, or not like been a hospital chaplain.
Right. The first thing I asked him, I got on the phone to him. I explained who I was and what I was calling for. So that's something I always do. I never hide what I'm doing. But I asked, hey, I'm calling about Robert Righi. He seems to be a good friend of yours. And the Father Michael responded with, who? I don't recall knowing a Robert Righi. So that kind of set the stage right there.
Oh.
We had a nice conversation, very nice gentleman, very pleasant to talk to. And I related all the details that I knew. I sent him a link to one of the interviews where he specifically mentioned. And
we should point out that, like with saying, oh, yeah, my good friend so-and-so, well, you may think of yourself as someone's friend, but to them, they may not remember you.
Right.
And so that's a possibility. So it's good that you sent him further details so that if like Riggy had just slipped his memory, these would serve as reminders that would allow him to place the incident and remember.
Right. Because I mean, I do that. I meet a lot of people and sometimes I don't remember. If you tell me your name, if you send me a message, it's like, oh, yeah, we had a great time. Thanks for hanging out. And I'm like, I'm always looking at my wife going, who is this? Do I know them?
Yeah.
Do I know them? And I don't try to be mean about it. I'm not like that. It's just that I forget.
It's kind of scary, but who had a really good memory for the names of everybody he met, and he impressed others with his memory of people he had just met and what their names were.
Who?
The Roman Emperor Nero.
Ooh.
The other Romans noted, wow, he really remembers your name, and that could come in handy in a variety of circumstances, like when you reward people or when you want to execute people.
See, this is why I like talking to you. You come up with little facts like that. I didn't know that before. That's awesome. So yeah, I did talk to Father Michael, and he watched or he listened to the interview overnight, and he called me back the next morning and said, hey, I am the person he's talking about. Definitely there's no doubt about it. He's talking about me.
Yeah. He was in the documentary about the demon house and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. So according to Father Michael, he does not know Robert Righi at all, does not recall ever meeting him. He did not perform any exorcism on a Kevin, to his knowledge. And he also stated firmly that he would never do an exorcism outside of his church. So that pretty much solidified, like, this is a really big plot hole in Riggy's story. Really big. I didn't contact the university hospital because I figured I can go. I went far enough with this.
You've already got a denial from the principal person involved. So yeah. Now I understand he also told you that some of the details about like how the exorcism would have worked were accurate that Riggy claimed, but he could have just looked those up, like read a book about exorcism.
Right.
But then other details that he claimed about how the exorcism would have worked were false, that they were wrong. So that would cast further doubt on him being an eyewitness to any exorcism if he's getting parts of the process wrong.
Yeah. He didn't go into detail, and that's cool.
And they usually won't. Yeah.
Right. But there's some things, there were some things about cleaning up the gentleman after certain things.
Personal care.
Yeah, personal care that Father Michael's like, no, we wouldn't be doing that. And Riggy claimed that all of them did it, that the priest and Robert took part in that. And he's like, no, that would not happen. And there were other details about the length of it and going for so many hours in a row. And there was a lot of details with that.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that he ultimately told you he doesn't think that this exorcism happened. Is that correct? That
is correct. Over our phone call at the end, I was pretty much making pointed questions like, all right, so you're absolutely sure you have never met him? You didn't partake in this? You didn't? Okay, good. I just wanted a concrete answer. And yeah, at the end, he's like, I don't really think this ever happened. Listening to the details, I don't think it happened at all. Mm-hmm. So I was like, all right, good. That's good enough for me.
And he asked you to pass on a message to Riggy to say, please stop using my name?
Yes, he did, because he didn't want to get involved. Father Michael, I think he got enough slack from participating in that Demon House documentary. Yeah, so he didn't want to get involved with another person like this. So he asked me to pass on the message just to inform Riggy to stop using his name, that he's aware of what Riggy is doing, and please just stop. And that's what I did.
And as we mentioned in the segment with Dom, Riggy does give out his phone number a lot. And you tried calling him. So have you gotten any response from Riggy?
I have not. I called 3 times. February 12th, February 17th, and February 27th. And I also emailed him. His email stopped working, so I got that sent back to me. But I left messages on his phone, gave my name, my number, exactly why I was calling, and basically saying, I want to talk to you about all these claims so that you can provide some kind of evidence to back them up. That's what I'm looking for. I didn't say anything about trying to expose him or, make him look foolish or anything like that. I want to see it. If you have your master's degrees, I want to see them. I would like to see them, please. If you have, because he claims to have the letters from Ted Bundy, not just one. He has several because he became pen pals with them. He also has from other serial killers.
He mentioned John Wayne Gacy in one interview. He said he had a letter from him.
Yeah. So I'd like to see them, because these are important papers. This would prove that you had something to do with it. If we could get it authenticated, that would be a whole new thing. But I would be willing to do it. I'd even pay for someone to authenticate them, or not authenticate them. Either way, I would do that, or offer any kind of just any kind of proof that his claims were real. For the exorcism, he claims to have a videotape, a VHS tape of the exorcism.
Oh, that is completely implausible.
And one of the things he says was that now the video is at the Vatican and they use it to instruct other priests.
His copy, not just a copy.
No.
His copy?
A copy of this. So he still has a copy of it.
Yeah, that's not true.
The character Kevin, and that's what I'm going to refer to it as, because I really don't think Kevin exists. Apparently Kevin has a copy of it, and depending on what interview, it's either Kevin watched it or Kevin didn't watch it. So yeah, somewhere there's allegedly a videotape that I would like to see, because if they gave it to Robert, it's not so private.
Yeah, well, they didn't give it to Robert. He's definitely lying about that. So we have this guy who makes claims that at best are unverifiable about his past, that appear to contradict what can be established about his past. He's talking on podcasts about his relationships with serial killers and how he exchanges correspondence with them. He's talking about his participation in exorcisms. And he is talking about working with children who display psychic functioning and children who are dying under hospice care.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think parents should be wary of employing him in these capacities?
Yes. Absolutely. As far as I know, with the hospice care, it sounds like he volunteers at a
hospice.
A hospice, yeah, for children. And he goes in there. I don't know what he does. I've seen a few pictures. That's another disturbing thing where he constantly shares pictures of him with the children or just the children with the podcast that he goes on. And he's very insistent on them sharing these pictures. And that's one thing my friend Taryn, I commend her on. She wouldn't do it. He kept mentioning like, oh, I sent you pictures earlier. Go ahead and put them up on screen. And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, with that, so the hospice, I didn't verify that yet. And I'm still looking into it, but I'm trying to find exactly which one. I don't know if that's a real volunteer work. And if it is, and he's not doing anything we see in the interviews, I'm still uneasy about it because of everything else. I mean, we've gone through his story. We've picked out things that are falsified, that are fabricated, that are embellished, that change and contradict each other. This is not an honest person. With other factors that, again, we won't get into, I would not leave anyone, especially children, but anyone alone with this gentleman. I would not. I wouldn't feel comfortable being in a room alone with him. Just because I don't want to get into that because then I'm going to get really, really angry. And I don't want to be that way.
Speaking for myself, I mean, I would, there's so much wrong with this guy's story, and there's so much that sounds unhealthy here that I would not want to, I would not recommend anybody have involvement with this guy. And if I had kids, I would never let him within a mile of them.
Yeah. So maybe, I don't know if we should explain it a little bit, because when he does his interviews, he does at the end, he wraps it up saying, he starts talking about the children of the paranormal. That's his term. And apparently he mentors 15 plus or minus, depending on the interview, children that claim to be
have some kind of psychic experiences.
Some kind of psychic experiences. I mean, in one interview, he goes so far to say the one young girl is psychokinetic or telekinetic for movie terms. She can move stuff all around at will. And I mean, the way he describes it, it's like this, she has a career in movies because she would be excellent at horror movies and all kinds of sci-fi movies. She would be excellent with it, but we don't get a name, which is good because it's still a child, but we don't get any other information that we can verify there. But he talks about encouraging parents that if you have a child that has behavioral problems or something and the doctors aren't helping, and he really gets negative on doctors at some points where I don't think a professional forensic psychologist should be doing that. But he kind of makes it sound like doctors don't know everything. They don't know how to treat your child if they're having these problems where they think they have powers or they're seeing ghosts or demons and they're misbehaving or acting out or running away. You should contact him instead of a doctor.
Yeah. So that's a bad idea.
Oh yeah.
So the fact that he's appeared on so many podcasts over the last several years, and this is only coming out as a result of your investigation now, what advice do you have for podcasters and podcast listeners to a typical paranormal podcast?
Research your guest. There's a habit, there's a trend where one podcast host will listen to other podcasts. I mean, that's something I do. I listen to podcasts all the time. And you hear somebody that's interesting on a show and you want them on your show. You want to interview them. That's great. But I think there's a difference between like what you do, what I do, and what a lot of these paranormal themed podcasts do. They will listen to someone, immediately send them a Facebook message and say, hey, I have a podcast, be on my show. And that's it. That's the research they do, which is non-existent. Whereas somebody like you and I, we will spend a lot of time researching this. And I know for a fact that you went over my article like with a fine-tooth comb, and you checked all my references and stuff and went through, and that's great. I encourage that. You even pointed out a mistake for me so that I can fix, which is great. But I also spend time researching a guest for like a week before they're on. So if I know I have a guest, I do background checks. I probably go overboard with what I do, but my advice to anyone hosting a show would be spend at least 5 minutes. Google their name without paranormal shows, because you put in Robert Righi and you get just nothing but paranormal shows.
Yeah.
There's a few.
There are operators you can use on like Google, like a minus sign to exclude words like paranormal or psychic or medium.
But check them out and see if they're legit. You know, if a red flag comes up, pursue it. And I think that's the biggest flaw with the paranormal themed podcasts, that they don't do any research. They take their guests at face value. And I mean, everything we learned about Riggy, about his interviews and stuff, came from him. There's nothing to verify. There's nothing to back up. We can't verify stuff unless you start really digging. And this is a potential danger, because so many of these podcasts, and again, there's at least, I would say like 25, 30 that I went through that featured him. And that's 25 to 30 times he was promoted as something positive for your children to contact him. And that is disturbing.
Yeah.
Very disturbing. So desperate parents will do desperate things. And they will reach out to someone even with the false sense of hope. And they might even know it's a false sense of hope, but they're still going to reach out for that slim chance that it might help their child. And if that's the case with this, if one of Robert's interviews reaches one of these desperate parents, that could potentially put their child in danger. And I say potentially because I don't know for sure, but that's the impression that I get.
Now, I want to be fair to people here, because in this episode, we have done a look at the evidence concerning one person who claims to be a psychic and a medium. And the evidence suggests he's a fabulist, that he's a fraud. At least that's how the evidence looks to me. Does that mean that all people who claim to be psychics or mediums are frauds?
No, not at all. My philosophy is everything is a case-by-case example. You know, I don't generalize like that. I don't stereotype like that. Just because one guy who made these outrageous claims is found to be false or a fraud doesn't mean everyone is. And I mean, I have many friends that claim to be psychic and or mediums, and we get along great. They know my perspective. I know their perspective. Sometimes we get together, we have good conversations. We talk about what's going on and ways that I could duplicate it or replicate their things, or maybe I can't. I don't know. But it doesn't mean that everyone is a fraud. Yeah. And just overall, I don't have that belief that everyone is a fraud that claims to be psychic or medium.
Yeah, and I wanted to make that clear. It's been my experience too. I mean, regardless of whether you think psychic functioning happens or not, I know people who I've gotten to know people who are who believe it does and believe they have some psychic abilities and who are very sincere about it. And so I just wanted to make that point. This episode is not an attack on that. It's looking at an individual case and seeing what we can find out about it and illustrating for the audience the kind of investigative techniques that can be used when someone is making these really extraordinary claims, and also the need to check out people who are making really extraordinary claims.
Exactly. And I mean, we really didn't touch on the psychic or medium claims that he has. We touched on a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah, it's similar to what I did in, so this is not the first, expose type show that I've done on Mysterious World. A number of, like in 2020, I did one on a Canadian priest named Father Michel Rodrigue, who has these apocalyptic visions. And in reviewing it, I did something very similar. I went through, with the help of a team, I went through just hours of his presentations and then identified the key bits. And then I was able to show enough problems with just his biographical claims that it meant I could have no confidence. If I can't even believe him about his biography of normal stuff, like what happened in church and things like that, and where in his personal history, if I can't trust him about that, I can't trust him to accurately report supernatural revelations he's having.
Right.
And in the same way with Riggy, if you can't believe his basic biography, he has no credibility with which to claim to have psychic functioning beyond that.
Right. And that's a good point. And that was a great episode. I love that episode that you did.
Oh, thank you.
That was good. That was really good.
So I want to thank you for being with us today. Is there anything you'd like to plug?
Sure. I do 2 live shows. One Friday night called the Skeptical Help Bar. It's at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And it's basically me. And sometimes I have a guest on. It's an educational show. We talk to various experts on different topics, different areas. And when I don't have a guest, we call it open mic night, because we go with the whole bar theme, and people are allowed to ask questions. It's a live Q&A. And I even bring on audience members or viewers to ask their questions in person and get more in depth. And if I don't know stuff, we look it up during the show, which is, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Saturday nights at 8 p.m. I do one called 3 Tortured Souls, and it's me and Tim Vickers, Dave Schumacher. We get together, we pick up one topic, and we discuss it from different perspectives. Dave was really into parapsychology, has done a lot of the same classes with Lloyd Auerbach, friends with Lloyd, and then Tim is a forensic interviewer for children. And we get together, we bring our different perspectives, and we discuss different things like Skinwalker Ranch or alien abductions, or what would we do to make a haunted house. Fun topics. And then I also do my column for Skeptical Inquirer called A Closer Look. You can find that on I think you're going to put the links in the description.
Yes, we'll have links to that. And also I wanted to thank you you gave me an acknowledgement in Skeptical Inquirer in your article. And that's kind of neat for me, because I come from a different perspective than Skeptical Inquirer, but I still appreciate a lot of what they do, because they are trying to use critical thinking. I think they are sometimes too dismissive of paranormal and supernatural claims, but I recognize the value in many parts of what they do. And so it's kind of neat for me to have an acknowledgement on their site. So thanks.
Always have to remember that it's different authors coming together.
Right.
So, and you're going to have all those different perspectives. I don't agree with all of them, but some I do agree with. And I'm right there in the middle. So, but yeah, the acknowledgement was well deserved. I mean, you helped me out. You gave me some advice, and I have that firm belief that, you give credit where credit is due. And everyone that helped me, I call out. I make sure they get the credit.
That's very kind of you.
Welcome.
Okay. Anything else we should cover before we go?
About Riggy specifically, I mean, we could go on. I don't want to get into anything else, because I think we can go on for like another hour.
Yeah.
There's so much information. I don't want to hog your show.
I think we've made the basic point.
Yes. Yeah. Just avoid him, and then check your resources, check your people. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much, Kenny Biddle, and hope to have you on again in the future on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jimmy.
Jimmy, what can we say about Robert Righi from the faith perspective?
From the perspective of Catholic faith and Christian faith in general, there are a lot of problems with what Righi is claiming. The faith is not opposed to the existence of psychic functioning. Doctors of the church, like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, both believed that God built what we would now call psychic abilities like precognition and psychokinesis into human nature. As we discussed back in episodes 105 and 106 on St. Thomas Aquinas and the occult. So Righi's claims to function as a psychic aren't intrinsically contrary to the faith. However, his work as a medium is much more problematic, as we discussed in episode 137 on mediums. And his work with past life regressions is extremely problematic, since the Christian faith holds that the afterlife involves resurrection, like happened with Jesus, instead of reincarnation, as we discussed in episodes 93 and 94 on reincarnation. So from a faith perspective, there's a lot to be concerned about here, quite apart from the fact that Riggy appears to be fundamentally untrustworthy.
So, Jimmy, what's your bottom line on Robert Righi?
To me, Robert Righi appears to be a fabulist. His stories change and contradict each other over time. He misuses psychological terms he ought to know if he had a master's in psychology. He cannot be documented to have the degrees or licensures that he claims. His known work history and residential history contradicts his claims. He likely made up his story about his interview with Ted Bundy. He appears to have lied about his involvement with exorcisms, and Father Michael Maginot claims never to have met him and never to have exorcised Kevin, if that's even a real person. Riggy also has a criminal record and has spent time in jail on 7 occasions. I personally would not let him have any contact with my children if I had children, whether they were displaying paranormal abilities or whether they were in the process of dying. In my opinion, Robert Righi is fundamentally untrustworthy and absolutely to be avoided.
And what further resources can you offer to the listeners and viewers?
We'll have a link to Kenny Biddle's article, Tall Tales of Psychic Medium Robert Righi. Also a link to Kenny's other articles at the Skeptical Inquirer. Also Kenny's I Am Kenny Biddle Facebook page and Kenny's YouTube channel and his Mystery Museum. We'll also have a link to an article on the Demon House documentary. We'll have a link to Father Michael Maginot's page at the church where he works. Also, the American Psychological Association's definition of forensic psychology, an article, a definition of echolalia, as well as an article on echolalia, and also an article on throat singing.
Excellent. And Jimmy, what do we have for mysterious headlines this week?
This week, we have a Things You See in Space theme. Recently, we have just managed to see, by which I mean photograph, something that we've known about for quite some time, but have never been able to image before. At the center of the Milky Way galaxy, there is an extremely dark, heavy object that is thought to be a supermassive black hole. We have evidence of these in other galaxies, and we have evidence of one in our galaxy. We've been able for a while to track the objects that are moving around it, because the core of the galaxy is very densely packed with stars and, gas clouds and stuff. And we can see things whipping around this apparent supermassive black hole. The name that has been given to it is Sagittarius A star. In this case, the star represents an asterisk. So we've known about Sagittarius A star for some time, but recently we were able to get an image of it. So you can click on the link we'll have and see the first image of the black hole at the heart of our galaxy. Another thing that you could see in space is suns going into reverse. Here on Earth, the Earth turns on its axis and we have this one sun. And so because of the rate at which we turn on our axis, you just see the sun move across the sky every day, going from east to west. And it's pretty boring. It just always goes in the same direction. Well, on other planets, you don't necessarily see your sun or suns doing that. In the recent episode where we talked about how we found the universe, among others, we've mentioned how as one planet passes another in its orbit, a planet in the sky can seem to go backwards. It's kind of like when you are driving a car on a highway and you pass another car, the car that you're passing, if it's going in the same direction, looks like it's starting to move backwards as you speed past it. When that happens with planets, it's called going into retrograde. But it turns out suns can do that too. So there are star systems where they have multiple suns, and if you're on an exoplanet orbiting those, you may see one of the suns one or more of the suns start going backwards in the sky rather than just keep going forwards. And that happens even in our own solar system on Mercury. Because Mercury is partially tidally locked with the sun, and it has its rotation period it turns so slowly compared to the shortness of its year that if you're on Mercury, you will see the sun like arcing in the sky, and then it'll start to wander back a little bit before it starts going forward again. So even here in our own solar system, you can see the sun go into reverse in the sky, and we'll have a link to where you can read about that.
Excellent. And if folks want to hear more about the Sagittarius A-star black hole at the center of our galaxy, a recent episode of another StarQuest podcast called Let's Science tells us a lot more about that there, too. Carolyn Knight does a great job of talking about a little bit of the history and that sort of thing. So check that out. sqpn.com/science. So that'll do it from us for us this time. We would love to hear your theories about Robert Righi and his extraordinary claims. You can let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page. Send an email to mysterious@sqpn.com. Send a tweet to @MYS_world. You can join the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord or call our mysterious feedback line at 619-738-4515. That's 619-738-4515.
And I want to say a special thank you to Oasis Studio 7 for the video and animation work they do on this episode and all the episodes of Mysterious World. They do a really great job, and you can check out their work by going to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin, and you can see the stuff they've been doing. I'm really pleased with it. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback from viewers now about what they're doing for the show. And if you have a need for video or animation work, check them out. We'll have their contact information on screen for you. And while you're at YouTube, looking at my YouTube channel, be sure to like, comment, and especially subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you'll always be notified whenever I have a new video, whether it's a Mysterious World video or something else. And I'm trying to grow my channel, so I'd really appreciate it.
So, Jimmy, what's our next episode going to be about?
Next week is a fifth Friday, so we'll be answering weird questions like, will we be frozen in time in heaven? Did Lazarus have a near-death experience? The paradox of what we see in the night sky, and that's a really interesting one. People may not be aware of this paradox, but there is actually a paradox involving the night sky. Also, resurrection and black holes and more.
All right. Folks, be sure to check out the Mysterious World bookstore at mysteriousworldstore.com for links to all the books and videos that Jimmy mentions in the show. You can find links to Jimmy's resources from our discussion and links to the mysterious headlines on our show notes at mysterious.fm/216. And remember, to help us continue to produce the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by Fearvento Law PLLC, now assisting clients with expungements and set-asides of Michigan convictions. To learn more, call 231-202-3321 or go to fearventolaw.com, FIORVENTO law.com. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by DeliverContacts.com, offering contact lenses at low prices with free delivery. Visit DeliverContacts.com. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.